Chapter 2. Prophets and Patriots. Versus. Priestcraft and Kingcraft. He commanded that there shall be no priestcrafts, for, behold, priestcrafts are that men preach and set themselves up for a light unto the world, that they may get gain and praise of the world, but they seek not the welfare of Zion. 2 Nephi 26:29. The lessons of history in the rise and fall of nations should still ring in our ears. Those ideals which have destroyed other nations and people should serve as a warning to our present generation. Our founding fathers obtained inspiration for the principles of freedom to establish this nation in the healthy climate of liberty. All succeeding representatives were duty-bound to maintain those principles and receive further inspiration spreading those branches of freedom to other nations. But politicians soon suppressed those freedoms to acquire more power, property, and expansion in government. By sacrificing the rights and property of the people, government grew like Jack's fabled beanstalk. Continuous new government controls and suppressions have increased until government has become the master of the people instead of their servant. The founding fathers violently opposed nationalizing private property. The graduated taxation on personal income would have been dumped in the Boston Harbor long before the British tea. By nationalizing the rights and property of its subjects, government has distributed wealth to the lazy, incompetent, and the unappreciative alien. They are leading the greatest country in the world to the brink of bankruptcy and ruin. The progress and incentive of people are being destroyed because our nation is becoming socialized to the collectivist ideals of legalized robbers. To accomplish such a twist in fate, leading politicians have had to pervert the virtues of liberty. America's principles of freedom have been distorted, misinterpreted, and falsified for the purpose of overthrow. Instead of being the defenders of freedom, unworthy leaders have sought for collectivism and a totalitarian supergovernment. The main purpose of government is to promote the right for life, not death in some foreign jungle, liberty, not slavery to government, and the pursuit of happiness, not compulsion for the welfare of others. When such political leaders see no difference between economic power and political power, they will usurp, tax, and grasp at everything possible to continue increasing the size and jurisdiction of national and international government. Such impostors see no difference between an employer and a robber, nor a difference between capitalism and communism. They presume that government is greater than the people who have created it, hence, our people are becoming slaves to their government. False leaders who bring such ruin upon a nation are thieves, they are the tyrants which the Constitution was intended to destroy. Instead of watering the tree of liberty for its growth, they are deliberately chopping it down. The great treason of politicians is default on their responsibility to protect the principles handed down to them. The most common failure is sacrificing them in appeasements, compromises, or bartering them away for temporal wealth, social honor, or peace with their enemies. The rise of statism in this country parallels that of the Roman Empire, whose grand fall was the result of political and spiritual suicide. The Romans' history of violence, blood, and anarchy, coupled with the invasion of barbarians, may again be repeated in our modern society and on our land, simply because the eternal principles of freedom and righteousness are being disregarded and disrespected. By shrewd manipulation, we are being mentally and spiritually recycled into the Dark Ages. It is no less reasonable that our scientific aerospace research should turn and start building covered wagons. We are trading freedom for socialism. Our great inheritance is being exchanged for a mess of pottage. Socialism teaches that man does not have the right to live, think, or pursue his own happiness. He is the property of the state. His work, talents, and possessions belong to the government. Yet socialism under the names of Nazism or communism would fare no better under the title of Americanism or the Great Society. The Marxist atheistic theory of communism teaches us that mind and spirit do not exist, that everything is matter. Production and machinery are the highest aims, not creative thinking, and that manual labor is the source of all wealth. They say freedom is to be enjoyed only by government, which can do no wrong, and that physical force is the only practical means of existence or power. They teach that everything changes, and that which is true today may not be true tomorrow. The leaders of such propaganda will not stop until they have amalgamated and baptized all nations, peoples, and ideals into their political slop. The prophet and the patriot are the only reliable cornerstones for a millennial era of peace and prosperity. The prophet expounds the principles of righteousness, the patriot extols the principles of freedom. Their opponents are those who perpetuate kingcraft and priestcraft. Kingcraft seeks power to rule over the wealth and property of its citizens, while priestcraft seeks to control the mind and the thinking of its disciples. Both seek for total control over man. Priestcraft and witchcraft are synonymous because their victims look to these spiritual leaders with an awe of complete subjugation. Whatever is done is accepted as a directive by God, and whatever concoction is brewed, medicinal or verbal, they will swallow with utter reliance as divinely approved. Such intellectual and spiritual digression has subjugated good men like monks in cloister cells of a monastery. They are without freedom or expression. Their will is totally subjugated in the silent, secluded servitude of foggy leadership. Kingcraft and priestcraft will always crush independence and freedom. They seek to have all people everywhere compelled into one race, one religion, and one rule. But integration of this kind is impossible, unscientific, and unnatural. You cannot forcefully combine all people into one property, one thought, and one race, for he who divided the nations, Deut. 32:8, and separated the tribes, Num. 2, never intended to mongrelize the races, nor collectivize their property. Collectivism, as a social ideal, represents an intellectual desert. Such a theory leads to passivity, submission, and resignation. For this reason, government was never intended to possess the right to nationalize a man's property, his mind, or his religion. The God who gave man life, gave him the right to obtain his own merits in property, knowledge, and faith. These are the inalienable rights of man, and no other leadership has the right to take them away. Too often political and religious leaders assume an air of an assumed dictatorship, in which they set themselves above reproach. Whatever they enforce into law must be accepted as legal, and whatever is spoken is irrefutable and unquestionable. Such doctrines make mental and physical slaves of men. The conservative patriot and the inspired disciple both labor against such demigods in the enemy's socialistic state of politics and priestcraft. Like the quiet force of the underground in alien territory, they are the noble crusaders who labor for the fresh air of freedom and righteousness that God has intended for men. America now stands at the halfway house of survival, and nothing but a revolution can save her. She is too far down the path to be corrected by minor adjustments. Either the enemy will cause a revolution for her overthrow, or else the patriots will revolt to throw off the enemies from within. From one source or another, blood and revolution are inevitable. Man's temporal and eternal salvation may depend upon the kind of principles and leadership he chooses to follow.